There will be another recording, yes. That's the sound that we make our panel.
So am I on the right place now? That's what I'm a bit confused.
Correct.
Okay, I'll stay as the chair of panel 2, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, I'll wait for others to join.
Professor Rahman, Assalamu alaikum. This is Sharif speaking. Assalamu alaikum, brother. How are you?
Thank you, brother. The rest of the people now can hear us, so it's better for the moderator, Professor Ayla Gol. We'll start the session and then we can continue. Thank you.
Okay.
Shall I give for the rest maybe 2 more minutes? Or are we all here as the panel members? Yeah. Maybe just 1 more minute and then I will start. Yeah, okay, I think academic 3 minutes waiting is over. I can see there are already 27 participants. Let me begin by thanking to IEPAS organizing committee, Rahman, and also Özgür. Please pass our get well wishes soon to him. It's a great pleasure to share this very timely session on precisely what we were talking about, Ken Booth's very, very thought-provoking keynote speech, how progressive or regressive path for especially Afghanistan after the withdrawal of the US troops, and what does it bring to Eurasia. I think this is a fascinating panel to see what our panel members is going to present. So I'm going to follow the order of papers as in the program. Our first presenter is Sertaç Canalp Korkmaz from the Presidency of the Republic of Turkey, and the topic is how Taliban expanded its control in Afghanistan 2021 to 2021. The floor is yours, and you have, let's say 10, but maximum 15 minutes.
Thank you, Doctor. I will make presentation, so I will share screen. Hello everyone. Today I will talk about how Taliban expanded its control area in Afghanistan within 20 years. Firstly, before starting my presentation, any argument or opinion expressed in this presentation does not reflect the official policy or position of any agency and institution of the Republic of Turkey. All its mine personal opinions. Let's start. My argument was it's also acceptable. Operation Enduring Freedom overthrown the Taliban regime in 2001, and during the following years, US-led coalition under NATO, under ISAF mission, first established and started to train Afghan national defense and security forces. Later, we see that each was incapable to struggle against any threat and failed. Thus, Taliban started to expand their control area because of capability of Afghan security forces was the almost major reason, but there are also several reasons behind their fallacy. Corruption in the country, it's not only in civilian bureaucracy, it's also can be seen in military sector. Also, lack of required capacity to fulfill military duties. US-led coalition conducted military operation by disregarding civilians in the country, failed modernization in the multi-ethnic traditional society are the main reasons behind the fallacy of Afghan government, Afghan security forces. Also, it's not possible to talk about 40-year-old issue here in 15 minutes, but it's very complex issue. But I also should reference to who is Taliban, what their aims. Taliban, as we know, local religious movement in the first, based on Kandahar, but they expanded in control area within years. According to Barnett Rubin, a very famous professor who specialized on Afghanistan affairs, he says that the Taliban was not reflecting a new strength in Afghanistan because historical process in this region there were shows that there were networks where students and teachers from madrasas in either Afghanistan or neighbor country Pakistan. It's a common issue where Pashtun population settle. It can be seen like Taliban-minded groups. Now, I mean, collapse of Afghan state occurred as a consequence of first the Soviet invasion, then Soviet withdrawal during the 1990s, increased Afghan refugees because of civil war occurred in Afghanistan. Most of these refugees became distant from education system, civil rights, and they fell into hands of Deobandi madrasas in Pashtun populated areas along the Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan. During the rise of Taliban before 9/11 attacks in this region in Afghanistan, it was a response to so-called achievements in the country. It was response to developments in the country, especially they were trying to eliminate warlords, criminals, bandits, because all they were making crimes and they were raping, they were stealing from the people, Afghan society. They are dealing with opinion trade, but also we should say something that Taliban also deal with opinion trade. Kandahar and another village cities in Afghanistan was in chaos because of civil war. In these conditions, Taliban rose from Kandahar to Kabul within 4 years. Then they captured the capital city of Afghanistan and they replaced the Afghan Republic of Afghanistan with Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They changed the flag. Also, under the Taliban leadership in the first era, I mean from 1996 to 2001, their first aim was providing security for Afghan society, eliminating, as I said, warlords and criminals, also implementing Sharia law, also their main aim. During this time also, we know that from Al-Qaeda's presence, it's important to understand Taliban regime. They expelled from Sudan 1996, and they moved to Afghanistan, their training camps, all their facilities. From Afghanistan, they conduct many terrorist attacks against United States and their missions, their military presence around the world. Finally, as to 9/11 attacks happened in 2001. It was very hard time for America and Western forces. They started to launch Operation Enduring Freedom as a consequence of 9/11 attacks. They wanted Taliban to cut off its relations with Al-Qaeda, but they didn't. Military operations started. Within 3 weeks, the Taliban movement took down and transitional government established within months. Hamid Karzai firstly elected for 2 years, then he won elections held in 2004. Following years, at military level especially, NATO-led international security forces established, and they are started to train Afghan security forces. They conduct cooperations with Afghan security forces, counterterrorism operations, counter-insurgence operations. At the beginning, even Taliban lose their control areas for limited years. I mean, at the beginning of American operations, NATO operations under ISAF mission, it was showing some victory, but it turned at the middle of 2000s years, especially in 2014, especially ISAF mission ended and was replaced by Resolute Support mission under NATO. It was a new NATO mission. Over the years, NATO forces, we know thousands of operations conducted, but during these operations, as I said before, these operations conducted by disregarding civilians in the country. Just remember what official reports by United Nations or Asia Foundation reports says that from 2016 to 2020, the majority of civilian casualties by air strikes, as civilian casualties reasons was air strikes. It was important to understand how Taliban get sympathy from the Afghan people. Even Afghan people at the beginning hate Taliban during the American operation starting 2001. In Afghanistan, we know that American forces and Western forces spent lots of money to build Afghan security forces, but it didn't work. We know more than half of the American funds for reconstruction devoted to creating Afghan security forces, but it's gone for nothing. You can reach these reports from SIGAR website. Every year, every quarter, they publish regularly this report. It's related activities in Afghanistan since 2002. You can see how the problem is, what's the problem in Afghanistan, what is working, what's not working. This report says that the corruption is a major problem inside the country, either military or civilian bureaucracy. Within years, Taliban started to expand its control area, especially because of incapacity of Afghan security forces, because lack of professionalism in Afghan security institution is main problem. I mean, this professionalism consists expertise, military ethics, advanced weapons and equipments, conscription. I mean, there is no developed military system in Afghanistan. Also, doctrine and training is have some problems. A lack of these dimensions are the main fallacy of the Afghan security forces. Also, we know from the field, I talk some my friends in Afghanistan, Afghan origin, who studied in Turkey before. All my friends says that there are many Afghan soldiers, hundreds within years, within 20-year period. There are thousands of people left the army, either fled to neighbor countries or joined the Taliban ranks, because they don't want to fight against Taliban. They know in the end, Taliban will seize the country, Taliban will capture the capital city. We don't want to die for. We don't want to die for what will happen in the end, we know, they say. In Afghanistan case also, why military forces not working, why this security institutions not working? Because of its historical background, geographical and cultural background is also important, because these are main shaping factors. Afghanistan always come together under free Afghanistan for invaders, for foreign military interventions, but they can't they can't be united against any internal issues. They know that becoming together against any foreign invader, foreign military intervention is okay, achievable, but it's not sustainable. And in the future will not sustainable.
Dr. Korkmaz, last 3 minutes, please. Towards the conclusion, last 3 minutes, please.
This was the factors I can say. Also, another factor is that the opium trade in Afghanistan shaped the corruption in the civilian and military bureaucracy. From some indexes which show something about Afghanistan, it's also important in this global peace index. You can see that where the Afghanistan is positioning, it's ranking every year within the last 5 countries among the 160 countries, 150 countries. Among the last 5 countries, Afghanistan position, it's the what Western forces and NATO forces tried to do something in Afghanistan is not work. They didn't bring any security, they didn't bring stability. They funded and created Afghanistan security forces institutions but it did not work. Also, previous next corruption index also says something about the Afghanistan position. Their ranking Afghanistan ranking is not changed within years. Civilian casualties also, as I said before, it was important to understand Taliban's influence over the Afghan society, Afghan population. In sum, I can say that vested billions by either United States or NATO forces, ISAF mission, even you have most qualified armies, even you have most advanced people, if you don't understand people's necessity, if you don't understand these people culturally, you can't succeed anything in this region. If you don't touch the people, what they need, if you prevent their cultural developments, their cultural necessities, you can't do anything. You will be failed, because the changing battlefield, changing warfares require different than we know traditionally. In Afghanistan case, rise of Taliban's most major reason was the fallacy of Afghan national security forces. Professor?
Yes, that's perfect timing. I'm assuming, Dr. Korkmaz, this was the end of your presentation. Immaculate timing. Thank you so much. And then we will move to our second paper by Huzeyfe Altınok and Hamdullah Baycar from Qatar University and University of Exeter. And their presentation is US withdrawal from Afghanistan, the rise of small Gulf states in international arena. The floor is yours. Again, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As our colleague explained, the rise of Taliban, now the Afghan issue also shows that another rise in the international politics, which is the rise of small Gulf states in the international politics. So first, in our research, we would like to start with the importance of the Gulf. The Gulf has been important for the international politics since the 18th century in the contemporary history. The first importance was from the geopolitical position of the region. The geopolitical position of the region located between the Western countries and their colonies gives them importance to be an intersection point. And after that, the discovery of oil raised that importance. However, the relation between the colonial powers and the Gulf rulers was kind of protectorate relations. The treaties that they have signed with the external powers give the rulers the ruling the interior, but leaving the foreign relation to the external power. Because of that, from that times to from the beginning of the 18th century, or maybe even before that, to the till the British withdrawal, the foreign policy of the states was controlled by the external powers. But after the 70s, the British withdrawal brought another case on the region. These countries, the chiefdoms transferred into countries. They built new Gulf states, and these new Gulf states built some foreign policies, foreign strategies. And these foreign strategies has been important in the international relation and examined by the small states foreign policies. So in our research, we will first try to explain the theoretical background of the small states foreign policies, and on the second part, on that part, we will try to explain the bandwagoning and the balance of power terms, and of course the soft power of the small states. And on the second part of the research, we will try to explain the chronological evolution of the foreign policy of the Gulf states from 70s to today. And on the third part, we will try to explain the role of small Gulf states, especially Qatar and United Arab Emirates, on the Afghanistan issue. The small states from the classical theories was not important because the lack of hard power and their limitation and their definition of the small states. Of course, the definition of the small states give us that the small states are limited with their population, the economic power, the hard power, and for their land. And these limitations make them prevent them to be an actor on the international relation on the classical theories. However, after the dissolution of Soviet Union and the disruption of the unipolar world system, the small states have been important in the international relation. The role they took, that role have been important from the soft power tools that they are following. That soft power tools generally could be the media, the personality of their leaders, and the economic power of the state, and the other relation that they took, like mediation power. But these tools give states to conduct some strategies to build foreign relations. The first is bandwagoning, to be a bandwagon of a greater power, being a protector, being under a security umbrella of a greater power. And the second is balance of power. The first one is limit the country from conducting their own foreign strategy, because they generally follow another state. But on the balance of power, it gives a freer role for the small states, that the partnership with the diversified partners gives them the ability of conduct the foreign policies. The small Gulf states has been in our research examined in 3 stages. The first, from 70s to 90s, to invasion of Kuwait by the Iraqi forces, and we will say that part, the hegemony of Saudi Arabia. From 90s to 2010s, the Arab Spring protest, the questioning the hegemony of Saudi Arabia and partnership with the United States. And from the Arab Spring to today is the questioning of the United States and having the several other partnerships, the balance of power in all, and being an important regional actor. The first place from 70s to 90s, from over the institutions like OPEC, OPEC Plus, and the foundation of the GCC, the small Gulf states was followed the foreign policy strategy of the Saudi Arabia. Mainly, we could say that they have been a bandwagon of Saudi Arabia at that stage. However, the invasion of Kuwait denoted that being a bandwagon of regional power, or having a powerful regional power in the region, make the small states under threat, under the threat of being invaded by that forces. Even though they have strong relation with the Saudi Arabia, small Gulf states from that moment try to conduct a new foreign policy to diversification of their partnership. And the first station that they were looking was at that stage was the United States. After the liberation of Kuwait, the United States raised their influence on the region, and not only influence, actually the presence on the region. They have built the military bases, they have strong relation with the small states. And Qatar and United Arab Emirates, 2 cases of this study was also these countries. And from that moment to 2010, they have raised their relation from with the United States. And it should be said that the 9/11 attack has accelerated that. And the third point was Arab Spring. After the Arab Spring, the United States has been questioned by the Gulf states, because they have left their decades-long allies like Hosni Mubarak on the Arab Spring, and they start to think United States an unreliable partner, and they have started to rise the partnership with other regional actors, and they have started to build new foreign policies, their own foreign policies. In Afghanistan issue, we could say that for Qatar and on that part we are trying to answer that what their role in the Afghan issue and why they are doing that. The first, Qatar is having relation with Afghanistan and Taliban from the 2013 with the support of United States. they have the political office of the Taliban as a neutral place between West and Taliban to be a place for negotiations. And the last 2 years denoted that they have been a really impactful host for the Afghan talks, which was the scene for the so-called peace between the United States and Afghanistan, and the planning preparation of the withdrawal of the United States from the region. However, after the withdrawal of United States, the crisis showed that the evacuation was a great problem, and the Joe Biden itself says that anyone without Qatar couldn't make this evacuation that much in that much stage. Qatar has the major player of that evacuations, because the Qatari foreign minister says that they have the relation with all the parties. They have passed the checkpoints easily, and they have been accompanied of the convoy of all the parties, like they have been on the checkpoints of the NATO, the Turkish, the United States force, and the Taliban force. All the checkpoints was passed through for the Qatari convoys, and it makes it a good place for the evacuations. And the Qatari foreign minister also said that the 40% of the evacuations has transferred via Qatar, or they have been hosted in the Qatar. The aid, the humanitarian aid, and the facilitation was also another duty of Qatar that make on the crisis, on the Afghan issue. And maybe nowadays one of the most important role that Qatar took is the controlling of the airport, and the technical support of the Qatar is the major candidate to be control on the airport. However, even though they have been important actor for the controlling airport, the foreign minister of Qatar again said that on the 14th of September that Qatar will not take the responsibility without a clear agreement. It also showed that the suspicion to overpower of the Taliban, and they make them secure, stay on the safe side. They make that.
Last 3 minutes, please.
Okay, Kıvanç. And for the United Arab Emirates also was important actor to evacuations, and also they have been a host place for the former president Ashraf Ghani, and they sent the humanitarian aid to Afghan people. This too shows that Qatar and United Arab Emirates' role on the Afghan issue, that Qatar is using its soft power to be an important actor on the regional and the global issues, and they also use the balance of power strategy between West and East, West and the regional powers and the others to conduct their foreign policy easily. But for the United Arab Emirates, it seems like the United Arab Emirates is following a way to be important, to be mentioned in the international relation, which is said being a hallmark on the international relations. The United Arab Emirates want to be a hallmark in the international relation. They're having a dissident and older president of a country is also sign of that. In conclusion, it could be said that the two important actors in the Gulf, the small Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, are using their soft power, their economic power, the mediation power, and their relation with the other states to conduct foreign policies, Qatari foreign policy is mainly based on the balance of power strategies, and it also shows that their importance on the region, because they can find a place for they can find a seat on the negotiations. As a small state is also seem important, and the United Arab Emirates also using its soft power to be mentioned, to be involved in the international politics, the global issues, which we could say the pinning on the map. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for a very informative paper, Huzeyfe. Our next speaker is Rahman Dag, and he's going to talk about great power politics and possible scenarios after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. The floor is yours, Rahman, and you have 15 minutes too. You might need to unmute yourself, Rahman. We can't hear you.
Yes, it's now.
Easily done. Yes,
Okay.
we can hear and see you.
Okay. My presentation is gonna be about the great power politics. Again, I think Huzeyfe already substantiated my theoretical background, so I'm gonna skip this side. But I will add something more to discuss the possible scenarios after the US withdrawal in Afghanistan. So great power politics actually is a concept that emerged during the initial years of the Cold War. The reason why the great power politics emerged in the IR discipline is actually one, and then two, Russia and Soviets overreached in all areas of power, economic, military, and political power actually. So this power gap between the first and second and the rest of the states led them, these two states, leading their hinterland, and the countries, like Huzeyfe said, either bandwagoning of the one of the leading states, or they just stayed ineffective. So why bipolar world system has changed, and now we are now talking about lots of the great powers. Now I think the previous panel was already about the China and Russia, their influence in the region. So it means that the power gap between the couple of states are actually closing, and then that let us think that they are going to be more involved in the international issues or international conflicts. So unless there is any revolutionary invention, like the Immanuel Wallerstein said, if it is technological breakthrough, that might change the hierarchy among the states. But the international system, if steadily grows and working, then the other states can close up the gap between the first and second superpower and them. So my point is that after the 2008 economic crisis, we start to talk about the regional powers and the rising powers. Actually, it actually started at the end of the 1990s, but economic crisis convinced most of the academics that the world system is about to change. So from the bipolar world system to multipolar world system, now we can talk about the couple of great powers and a couple of rising powers. So I'm not gonna delve into the theoretical background of these two issues, because I think we have just 10 minutes left. I am counting the time by the way. So international conflicts, great power politics, which is my first initial argument, is happening at the international level with the global powers and the regional level, and also national and subnational levels. So that changed the nature of the conflicts in the multipolar world system. So when just pick up the one of the conflicts and you will see that the superpower take a side and another regional power is on the same side or the rival side, and they find that their subnational groups to support their argument in the battleground, or I don't want to say battleground, but on the area. So I will take the two separate international conflicts to envision a possible scenario for Afghanistan. It was the first, the Libya crisis and the Syrian crisis. When we look at these two crises, we will see that their national government easily gets rid of one of them in Libya by NATO and international coalition, and Syria, Bashar Assad regime is still working and on the power, but the country was almost apart three by the oppositions and by the PYG and the Syrian regime. So we see that there are three levels of interaction: one global level, another one is regional level, and the national, or we can call it subnational level. So my argument is that will be the same in Afghanistan, but we need to explain, substantiate our main argument in Libya and Syria. When we look at the first case, the Libya, now we have the two different working government. One of them national unity government, another one is the opposition, we could say, or the legitimate government. It depends to your stance to the point. But still we have two different points at subnational level. And at the regional level, we see the Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt supporting one side, and the Turkey, Qatar, and the other regional level, the supporting the national unity government. And on the other hand, in the another level, we have Russia and USA in the rivalry in Libya. So that's the example of the three-level condition of international conflicts. It is almost the same in Syria as well. We have the global powers, Russia supporting the Bashar Assad regime, and the USA and EU on the one side, and silence of China, we can interpret that they are supporting the Assad regime. And on the other hand, in the second level, at the regional level, Qatar and Syria are now supporting the oppositional groups. UAE and US officially actually integrated or cooperated with the Kurdish groups in Syria. So we have three different separate groups with the subnational level, regional level, and international level, and they are represented by certain states and groups and ideologies. So Libya actually was involved by the NATO according to international law, and the international coalition, again, the terrorism later. And the Syria is full of the foreign soldiers by the states and the groups, and they involved in the Syria with the international coalition to fight against the ISIS. So with these two international conflicts, we can see that the Afghanistan might be another international conflict zone, and we can apply these three-level analysis of international conflict. So we mostly call that the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, but it is the soldiers, they left the country. It doesn't mean that the USA will never involve into the politics or economic condition and social condition in Afghanistan. Actually, the Biden, after the withdrawal completed, declared that they are not finished yet. They just don't want to have their own soldiers and the foods in Afghanistan. So USA will be the one side of the global power. And when we see the Chinese moderate declaration about the Taliban's government and the Russia's skeptical, but still on the side of Taliban, we could say, approach to the Afghan issues, we will say we will see almost the same, not the same, but almost the same situation in Libya and in Syria, in Afghanistan. The case of the Syria and Libya we can see in Afghanistan. So at regional level, Turkey is not totally rejected the Taliban regime, but still try to communicate with the third parties. Sometimes they directly communicate, actually. On the other hand, the Qatar still, as the Huzeyfe already mentioned about it, they are closely communicating each other and try to get some concrete agreement about how to deal the airport and the other issues. So we will have the same struggle at 3 level, and that will be great power politics at 3 level in Afghanistan. So US withdrawal in Afghanistan or the Taliban's regime did not change does not change this reality, not reality, but my argument. There will be another conflict at 3 level. Why such a conflict happens in might happen in Afghanistan? That's another issue. Afghanistan is now militarily totally disbanded. There is no any regular army. Taliban declared that they are going to have their own army, but still not yet completed. And economically distracted, culturally and socially separated each other. And so when we add the natural resources of Afghanistan into the dynamics, we can see that there will be another international conflict which can be analyzed by the international level, regional level, and subnational level. So based on this analysis, I will conclude that Afghanistan might be another Syria or Libya in near future if these cases say something about it. And thank you very much. I will be happy to have some questions from the audiences and other participants and the panelists as well. Thank you very much. That will be my end of my presentation.
Thank you, Rahman.
I think it was quick.
Very precise timekeeping. Even you finished before than you're allocated. You had 2 more minutes. But I'm sure it will be very interesting, many questions. So our last paper is Sharifullah Dorani, part of Cesran International. Why Biden got it wrong? And you have exactly 15 minutes to tell us.
Thank you. Well, before I do the presentation, I'm just going to say that I was not in favor of the American presence in Afghanistan, but I was and am against the hasty withdrawal. I think there should have been a responsible withdrawal. So this is just, I want to say that beforehand. I'm going to talk about why President Biden got the withdrawal wrong. Firstly, a few words about President Biden. I mean, Biden has a wealth of experience in foreign policy as a 6-term senator from Delaware and serving as a chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations between 2001 and 2003 and 2007 and 2009. He was seen as the most trusted voice on foreign policy. Ironically, he was a leading liberal hawk who supported military interventions for altruistic purposes, including nation building, i.e., for example, US intervention in the Balkans in the 1990s and the Iraq invasion in 2003. So he supported both of them. As a senator, he always believed that our hope is that that's his quote. Our hope is that we will see a relatively stable government in Afghanistan, one that provides the foundation for future reconstruction of that country. And in another quote, he said, alternative to nation building is chaos in Afghanistan, a chaos that churns out bloodthirsty warlords, drug traffickers, and terrorists. Towards the end of the Junior Bush administration, he even asked for a Marshall Plan for Afghanistan to make the country self-sustaining, and it did not matter if it took up a decade or longer. Back then, he said that President Hamid Karzai would perform better if the US provided more resources, troops, and a better strategy. And the US should commit whatever it took, I stress, he said, or else history would judge the US harshly if it permitted the hopes of the liberated Afghans to evaporate. In 2008, Biden was of the opinion that the US would not meet the Soviet fate in Afghanistan since the US offered a better choice. That's another quote. But his views dramatically changed after a tour of Afghanistan as vice president-elect in late 2008. And below are some of the policy assumptions that his changed views are based upon. Biden continued to hold these policy assumptions as a president. Using his bureaucratic position as president, he managed to influence the process of the decision-making and consequently the resulting decision, which was the withdrawal decision to unconditionally on a set date, regardless of conditions on the ground. So in my opinion, that decision was just Biden and Biden alone. I think he could have easily changed that decision, but he stuck to it. And why did he stick to his decision? There are my reasons. I think it's to do with his views of the Afghanistan war and unfortunately of the Afghanistan people. Vice President and now President Biden believe that certain conditions in Afghanistan, including a reliable government, sufficient security forces, secure borders, and a suitable environment were not in place. So no matter how long the US stayed in Afghanistan, it would fail. For Biden, Afghanistan never had an effective central government to provide governance in rural parts. And Afghanistan's complexity would never allow to create one. And the inborn complexities or indifferences that Biden stated many times are as follows. Afghanistan suffering deeply from decades of civil war, religious extremism, drug mafia, neighboring interference, Pakistan in particular, with which Afghanistan shares 2,500 miles of Paris border, poverty, unemployment, lack of education, and the presence of different ethnic, linguistic, sectarian, tribal, and political groups who had never been getting on with each other for centuries. That's Biden's quotes, by the way. That's not my words. That's their beliefs. I do not agree with most of them. These groups were backed by regional countries for their own conflicting interests. It's messy, Biden said. Biden conceded in remarks to reporters a few weeks ago. He said, I have never been of the view that we should be sacrificing American lives to try to establish a democratic government in Afghanistan, a country that has never once in its entire history been a united country and is made up of different tribes who have never, ever, ever got along with one another. So that is the core of Biden's belief. And in my opinion, this belief forced him to end the war unconditionally, because he thought no matter how many years we stay in Afghanistan, how many decades we stay in Afghanistan, what we saw in August 2021, a month ago, that would be the natural results, even if we stay there for another decade. Second assumption that Biden also held. President Biden assumed that most empires failed in Afghanistan, so the US would likely to follow suit. As Afghanistan had become a Vietnam for the Soviet Union, he further assumed. This is, initially, he didn't think that, as I stated earlier on, that Afghanistan would become a Vietnam for America, because Biden believed that they were offering a different choice to what the Soviet Union was offering. But after 2009, he started to believe that. And one wonders whether he was saying these things in 2008 to get elected, and as soon as he got elected, just changed his mind, or really when he went to Afghanistan and saw everything from a close proximity, spoke to President Karzai, spoke to the American forces who told him in Afghanistan, they told Biden, we don't know why we are fighting in Afghanistan, because the Al-Qaeda has run away. The Al-Qaeda is in Pakistan, and the Taliban are not our enemy. So this is how his views changed. That's what Biden claims, that his views changed because of that tour mainly. As Afghanistan had become a Vietnam for the Soviet Union, Biden says he further assumes Afghanistan would equally become another Vietnam for the US. China and Russia left to see the US embroiled in the forever war, which had already cost the US more than $2 billion, more than that. Third, there were numerous assumptions regarding Pakistan, which I'm really surprised your previous guest speaker didn't mention anything when he talked about why the Taliban took over Afghanistan. He mentioned his main focus was on corruption and on the Afghan government, which I accept that the Afghan government bears a lot of responsibility. But as Professor Rahman Dag was saying, there are also foreign elements to the Afghanistan war, and unfortunately, he did not even mention that. But anyway, second, for Biden, Pakistan was the first thing that the Pakistan issue was first, that since US presence did not extend beyond the Afghanistan borders into safe haven in Pakistan. So it was assumed by Biden that the US would never win, regardless of how many thousand troops they deployed to Afghanistan or how many years they stayed there, because all the terrorist grounds, whatever you call them, were in that lawless border, where the US president could not get to there because that was part of the Pakistan territory. Second, for Biden, Pakistan was assumed to hold the key to ending the conflicts in Afghanistan, and US long-term presence in Afghanistan would further undermine Pakistan's interest in Afghanistan and the region. Pakistan would create obstacles to undermine any US policy that required the US to prolong her stay. Bruce Riedel, he was working in the CIA when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So he was instrumental in making policy for the Mujahideen. He was instrumental in the AFPAC strategy for Obama in 2009. And he just wrote in his latest piece for Brookings, he says that in effect, the US had been in war with Pakistan's militia, and it was an unwinnable war. No matter how long they stayed there, they would not win the war. So he defended Biden's withdrawal decision, though at the time we didn't see the chaotic aftermath. I think he wrote sometimes in the month of May or June. So the sooner the US left, the better. Thirdly, Biden believed the US footprint in Afghanistan was assumed to be feeding insecurity in Pakistan. And this is very important. And by extending US presence in Afghanistan, it might make it worse. For Biden, Pakistan was more important than Afghanistan, owing to Pakistan's population, which is 6 times bigger than Afghanistan, possession of nuclear weapons, of course, and location. It borders India, China, Iran, Afghanistan. All those 4 countries are important to the US for different reasons. Fourth, Biden did not assume that the Taliban government, and this is really important as well, this started in 2009 after the AFPAC policy, because previous to that, Bush and the Bush administration, President Bush and his administration more or less saw the Taliban as enemy, but this changed in 2009. Biden did not assume that the Taliban government in Kabul would pose a danger to the US, and hence did not classify it as an enemy. He was one of the first advocates who argued against the goal to defeat the Taliban, as there was no need for this. Defeating the Taliban, Biden argued, was was assumed to be too ambitious, unachievable, and unnecessary goal for as far as US interests were concerned in Afghanistan. It was so because Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were separate, and Afghanistan would not be used to launch terrorist attacks against the US and the allies. And it was so because Biden believed that the Taliban's outlook was inward. That is, that they focused only on Afghanistan. The Taliban fought the US forces because US invaded Afghanistan. As soon as we take that element out, we withdraw our troops, Taliban has got nothing to do with us. And initially that was the case. I agree with that too. It was because, okay. Furthermore, there were not many, and then there's another thing for Biden. There were not many Al-Qaeda fighters present in Afghanistan, as they were in the lawless borders between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And then Biden argues, if there were Al-Qaeda presence, must the US deploy troops to other countries where Al-Qaeda had a presence? So there are many, many countries. Can we send troops to all of these countries? And he said no. Consequently, Afghanistan was not as important as the military or the pro-war pundits made it appear, Biden argued. And this is something that was taking place in the decision-making during the decision-making was, I believe, in the month of April that was making. The decision was made in May, and they were making the decision that they sat together and talked to Afghanistan was in April, I believe, sometimes around that. These are the things that they were discussing with the Secretary of Defense and Lincoln, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, basically. So consequently, Afghanistan was not as important as the military or the pro-war pundits made it appear, and thus a counter-terrorism strategy, Biden argued, without the presence of US troops would suffice in order to hunt terrorists, which is a less ambitious goal. That is, if the Taliban did not stick to their word and allow terrorist groups to operate from Afghanistan. So at the moment, the Taliban have giving their word, the Taliban and the Taliban's regional supporter have given their word to America that you are there spending billions of dollars for two reasons: that to defeat or eventually defeat the terrorist groups, and also to ensure Afghanistan is not used as a terrorist ground. We could do it for free for you. Let the Taliban take over. We will stay there. You don't have to spend a single penny. We'll be there ensuring that these two objectives are accomplished. What is the point in staying in Afghanistan when the Afghan, like the first speaker said, like the Afghan government is corrupt? You work for years and years, nothing gets improved. The situation is like that. There is a stalemate. Between 200 to 600 Afghans get killed on a daily basis. US troops at times get killed, and it's just not worth it anyway. So and this is another important point that I must mention. Biden, hard it might be, Biden argued, but he did not assume a US retreat or a US withdrawal from Afghanistan to be strategically detrimental to US interest or prestige. This is Biden strongly believed that. He believed that even in 2009. He said the same thing to Obama. To the contrary, all US allies, he believed, especially their people, have been fed up with the forever war, and they wanted to end it. So now, as my colleague Professor Rahman Dag was saying, and I would word it differently, we will see what is going to happen after that, the withdrawal decision. Firstly, before I go to that, I'm just going to quickly mention that there were a few assumptions about the withdrawal decision. I hope I'm still okay with the timing.
Last 3 minutes.
Last 3 minutes. Basically, he believed that the Ashraf Ghani government would not fall. He believed that the Ansaf would continue to fight, but that assumptions turn out to be false. Now there are three important assumptions that that time will tell us. Firstly, will the Taliban cut ties with Al-Qaeda, or have they cut ties with Al-Qaeda? Will the Taliban be able to manage the 20 or so terrorist groups that are brewing in Afghanistan? Importantly, ISIS-K. Will Afghanistan soil not be used as a terrorist group ground against the West? Will they be moderate Taliban that they have promised to be, or will their attention turn outward towards expansion their ideology? Will the West be able to manage the members of the Afghans coming to Europe, the refugee crisis that I believe will have already started, it will expand? Will the neighboring states, Iran, Russia, and particularly India, watch the Taliban government succeed? Because the Afghan government was supported by those countries. Initially, Russia it's complicated with Iran and Russia anyway, but India still is quite upset about what's been happening in Afghanistan. So we will see what's going to happen. Well, there's going to be another insurgency, especially with the way the Taliban are carrying with their internal and foreign policy. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. There are so many things to discuss. What a wonderful session. But before we start, there are two household announcements. One of them, if you have a question, I can see Faik has already raised his hand. Please use through the reactions to raise your hand instead of typing your question, and then ask your question following the order who raised his or her hand first. And the second one is apparently the host has to, at the end of the session, turn off the system altogether, and then it needs to be turned back on immediately. And therefore, just make sure that you leave and then come back for the next session. I think like Rahman has started the tradition with Ken Boots, I'm gonna abuse my position as the chair, and because what we have seen is the complexity. I think Rahman has emphasized how the international, regional, national, subnational is really connected, and all the papers are really, really well connected, starting how Dr. Korkmaz's paper that Taliban established control, but just blaming Afghanistan and its historical complexities, demographic complexities, doesn't answer all these questions we have unless we understand how the regional actors, neighbors have intervened. And I think Sharifullah has left us with very important questions. And I would say, in terms of the complexity of Afghanistan, I think the term has been used as the graveyard of empires, which is a bit an insult to Afghanistan and Afghan history and people. But again, looking from European, more American or Western-centric perspective to understand. I have different questions for each speakers, and I will hold my question in this sense. And I already saw some hands raising, but what I want to leave the panelists and the participants to think about what Ken Booth left us with the revolutionary in the mindset, how the perception of Afghan history, society, people might have to be changed, revolutionizing the mindset, not for the people coming from the region, maybe outsiders, external powers looking at the region. And this debates and our papers and research is probably a contribution towards that. So the complexity of mindset, the complexity of past, present, and future is a hanging question with all of us. I'll give the floor to Faik, as I think he raised his hand first. And I can see you already unmuted yourself, yes. And the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ayla. I want to mention 2 points that we mostly overlook when we're talking about Afghanistan. One, after the decade of civil war and chaos, Taliban have proven themselves as a stabilizing factor in Afghan society. Whatever their modus operandi were, their action, their strictness, whatever it was, but the international community has alienated themselves earlier when they came into power. Now I wonder that they are making the same approach again, alienating the Taliban from international community. Would it be right to do so? And second, the point we overlook mostly, during the after the 9/11 event, Taliban were agreed to hand over Osama bin Laden to any third country. So is it a right approach to deal with the Taliban, or should international community work hard to include them in their affairs? Secondly, Sharifullah Dorani has provided very constructive argument and analysis, and I totally agree with that. Thank you.
Okay.
I supposed to answer that
yeah.
question. Who's supposed
Yeah,
to answer that?
I think, yes, I think this question is for you. But if any other panel member, please, either raise your hand or unmute yourself if you want to contribute. But first, Sharifullah, please.
Yes, two very important questions, and something that at times I think about it quite deeply and I just don't know the answer myself to it. Shall the international community work with the Taliban and get the situation, make it better, or work against it and even make it worse? It's a very good question, but it all depends on the Taliban and what sort of policies they employ. In Afghanistan, we had 350,000 strong Afghan national security forces. Yes, although Biden was saying it, they were not fighting, they were fighting. 66,000 of them lost their lives in the past 5 years. They lost their lives in fighting for Afghanistan because they didn't have a proper leadership. Anyway, so they could include that in the government. They should focus on our constitution, which hundreds of experts spend time to create that. So include that in the constitution. Of course, Sharia law, as we all Muslims, and I'm Muslim, I respect that, but will the international community be happy? You have to compromise. That's second. Thirdly, they have to give women their voices because they are half of our population. And go to any country, Pakistan, Indonesia, any Muslim country, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, their women have got their voices. So if the Taliban focus on those good policies and they work with the international community would work with them. But if they focus on their own agenda, then the international community, most of them are democracies. And if their voters see things or bad things are happening in Afghanistan, then of course they'll tell their governments don't help them because they're not helping themselves. So everything is in the hands of the Taliban. They should really work hard to implement the right policies.
Professor Ayla, let me say something about the comment and the question. Thank you. One of the aspects of my research is actually about the alternative ruling system. As we all know, the democracy almost for a century is considered that as the best administrative system for human being, for check and balances and for the understanding the nature of human being, etc. But the great power politics is not only about the military and economic power. Actually, it is ideational power. So if we have the Russia and the China, one of them is almost ruled by a single party government, and China is have now the lifelong presidency. So their influence and their weight in international system actually opened the way of the alternative way of ruling system, and the international system are about to accept or have to accept this way of ruling systems. So Taliban actually is now presenting an alternative way of ruling system. We might call it authoritarian, totalitarian, or we have massive literature about defining the ruling systems. But I will think that the international system will not alienate the Taliban from the international society, because why now US withdraw from Afghanistan without any concrete success is that there is no way to intervene anymore. So we have to let these people work for their own issues. So if they left Afghanistan from military perspective, they will watch the Taliban, but still I think they are not alienated to Afghanistan, because we know that most of the names that the Afghan names work for the USA, they will be given to Taliban because they just wanted to sure that their travel from their home to airport is not attacked by the Taliban forces. So actually, they have already started to cooperating each other. And another way of alternative ruling system is about, I remember that I saw a picture that the Minister of Economy or the Treasurer, I don't remember, they have the Kalashnikov or the weapon on the desk, but he is the Minister of Economy. So people could say that, of course, economy is now conducted by gun, not the trade agreements or something like that. But it doesn't matter. They, from their quotes to their understanding, they have alternative. They presenting an alternative system, and they have to moderate. I accept that one. But from the great power politics perspective, non-democratic way of powers are increasing in the world system, and their increase will open the way for alternative ruling system, and one of them will be Afghanistan, I think. Thank you very much. That will be my comment.
Thank you, Rahman. I think that's very, very helpful information and also answered to the question. I can't see any hands up. And in this case, as I said, I had my individual questions that I want to go back to the first speaker, Dr. Korkmaz. I think, yeah, if you, yes, Sharifullah has raised his hand, but maybe as a question, it's going to also relate to Sharifullah's paper and what Rahman has already, as well as Huzeyfe's paper, how that alternative ruling system, Rahman, and also Taliban is using ideational power or soft power in the sense, and Sharifullah mentioned again, it depends on how Taliban is going to be an actor in international arena, whether international community can engage or not. And it made me to think about, going back to Dr. Korkmaz's paper, or the use of opium as a tool of foreign policy. So they really used it very cleverly, both economic, i.e. the power of opium sales in international market, controlling it and having an influence on international decision making, but at the same time using their soft power, like the destruction of Bamyan Buddhas, and they really used both ideational and material very cleverly. I thought that was very clever to put the US and the Western powers on the corner to force them to engage with them. So this is what made me to think whether Taliban, do we have any evidence that they are going to use similar strategy, both material and ideational power? You know, they are really engaging with society, but at the same time using economic power as well. Any evidence that which way they might go, and then that will make them a reliable partner in for international community. And then I think I will stop here. I thought I saw a hand. Sharifullah, it was you.
Yeah.
And yes, I'll give it to you now. Yeah.
So would you like me to answer your question if there is an answer to that? It's a very good question. It's a very good question. What we see at the moment in Kabul is that we have got the Taliban who have spent time abroad, especially during this peace negotiation, and who have become a little bit moderate. And they are arguing for those, for policies that are moderate. But we have, on the other hand, those Taliban who were mainly fighting, and they were fighters. So their worldview is limited to the place they were fighting and to their understanding of the religion of Islam. So they're arguing for the opposite. We will see what is going to happen, who's going to win. And it's also depending on how the international community interact with the Taliban. That's the answer to your first question. We do not know yet. But we see there are provocative steps which are unnecessary for the Taliban. For example, the Taliban has established a Ministry of Vice and Virtue. But instead of choosing there were hundreds of buildings in Afghanistan that they could have chosen to use it as their ministry. They've chosen the building which was used for women's affairs, basically, the Ministry of Women. So they deliberately chose that building. Why they chose it? On the one hand, you could say those people with the radical views said, no, we don't want women ministry anymore. We want to just show it to the world that we don't want that. But it could also be, as you are saying, something to show to the West, come on, please engage with us. So I don't know the answer to that. That's the answer to your question. And I was just going to ask Dr. Sertaç that when he had his analysis, I understand that he talked about, he focused on corruption in the Afghan government. And he basically, his argument, as I understood it, was the Taliban won because of that corruption. And also it suggested as if the Taliban are very popular in Afghanistan. And let me tell you, as an Afghan, I grew up both in Kabul and in a province, which is very, very religious place. Our ancestors were not like the way they have that interpretation of Islam. That's first thing. Secondly, does he believe the Afghan people now support the Taliban? And where were the foreign elements or the foreign interference in helping the Taliban to come into power? Because for the last 40 years, in my opinion, no government in Afghanistan came into power without the help of foreign elements. No government whatsoever. So how come the Taliban came into power just based on corruption in the Afghan government?
Okay, thank you, Sharifullah. I think Dr. Korkmaz, the floor is yours, and then I can see Scott Lucas has raised his hand, and then, yeah, we have 8 minutes left, I think. Okay. Enough, more than enough time.
Actually, Taliban's coming to power is not only related with corruption or their sympathy among Afghan people. Of course, there are some people voting, supporting Taliban, but they are also not supporting people in Afghanistan. I think in the first period from 1996 to 2001, we witnessed very, very worse practices by Taliban in Afghanistan, as Dr. Ayla Gol said, culturally and economically at societal level, there are very worse applications by Taliban in Afghanistan. But for second term, I mean after US withdrawal, Taliban will change something, because in the first era, Taliban's coming power for, they want to eliminate, as I said, provide stability, provide security, they come for power in first era. But the second time, I mean this time, it will change, but it will change, depend as their international relations. If they make relations with China, it will be different Taliban. It will make relations with Western countries, there will be different Taliban. These conditions will shape the future of Afghanistan and future of Taliban, I think.
Okay, thank you. I think, Scott, if you can just frame your question in 2 minutes and then answer whoever you are asking the question in 3 minutes. We will finish on time in 5 minutes.
I will try to be very quick, but I need to learn from a great panel to go a bit further. My perception is that, and this connects the local with the regional, my perception is that there is a split within the Taliban between a faction which includes the Haqqani network and the faction which included the negotiators in Doha, such as Mullah Baradar. So my question related to that, I've actually got two questions, try to connect them. The first is, to what extent is that split going to play it out internally, or what role do external actors have, like Pakistan, in that dynamic? What role does Mullah Akhundzada, I hope I pronounced that correct, have as the supposedly supreme religious leader, if any? And then the second question is broader about Afghanistan and the region. Do you believe we will see a single Afghanistan, or that in fact we will return to the more factioned or fragmented Afghanistan? For example, that a country like Iran can try to regain influence in Herat, and that we might see Ismail Khan coming back into the country with the Taliban failing to establish full control. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that question is Sharifullah, but if any other panel member, please, we have 4 minutes, more than 3.
I will be very quick. Since for the past 40 years, that has been unfortunately the problem. Tension between Khalqi and Pachimi during the Soviet Union, tension between Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Ahmad Shah Massoud during the Mujahideen era, as Dr. Sertaç was referring to it earlier on, and it resulted in lots of lives and a lot of tragedies, and tension between Dr. Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani. We saw it again. Previous to that, within the Karzai government, there was tension between Karzai and the Northern Alliance, and then it got resolved later on. And external factors, the Soviet tried to solve the problem to a certain extent. They were successful, but later on, not. We saw the case of America, how successful it wasn't, when John Kerry went there. And in case of Pakistan, there was a lot of tension, and the ISI head came to Afghanistan reportedly to sort that out, and they took Mullah Baradar out of the first seat and gave it to Hassan Akhundzada. So we don't know, to be honest with you. It really depends on how much influence the Taliban will allow the Pakistan to have, and how they will solve their problems. And the second thing, again, it goes, if the Taliban are going to be clever in their policies, and yes, as Professor Rahman Dag was saying, we are happy with that authoritarian regime. Maybe the world would be happy with it as long as they achieve those two objectives that the US have told them, and also include all of the Afghans, the Hazaras, the Tajik, the Uzbek, the women of Afghanistan. They would be successful. If not, and they carry on like one of the ministers was saying, we don't care about the West, we don't care about that, we have God. Okay, you have God, but you're responsible for 38 million people, and God has given you that power. So think and make policies and serve your people. So if they go with such policies, then do not include those people, and the interference starts by the regional powers, the ones I mentioned, then unfortunately we will be going back to square one, back to the 1990s, where one fraction would be supported by one country, another fraction would be supported by another country. The Taliban would be fighting among themselves. It's going to be a chaos. It really depends what we're going to see in the future from the policy the Taliban implement, and what how far the regional powers going to intervene in the affairs of Afghanistan.
Okay, excellent. This has been really, Rahman. Yes, do you want to? You
I think
in 1 minute.
1 minute left. Yeah, I am gonna use that one. Actually, Dr. Sharifullah mentioned lots of the names and the changes in ruling groups. That's fine. I don't know any one of them. So, but I will focus the another extent that he mentioned, the external factors. From the great power politics perspective, I think if we look at from this perspective, it depends to which regional or international power give enough support to dominate one of the group over others. So I don't know which group is powerful enough to rule the country as a certain way of thinking, but still, as an external factor, it depends to which country. For example, I see that the Turkey is not totally totally agree with one of the groups ruling the country, and they didn't involve as much it could. Now standing up, looking, watching, and decide later. That's the policy of all the international society, and I think the major output of this panel is going to be, okay, wait and see. That will be our common policy. We just evolving around if we wait, how long, if this happens and what happens, otherwise that will be happen, something like that. I understand, but from the external effect, you could say that which country deem enough or really eager to enough to support one of the group to rule the whole country. There will be another nation building process, as America failed in Iraq and Afghanistan and most of the international crisis. Let's see the other nation builder, which country is gonna be that. That's my last comment, and I think we overreached the 1 minute.
Can I say one thing? Can I say one thing, please? Very short.
One more minute.
One
yes.
thing. There is a perception that America failed in Afghanistan, and to a certain extent, that's correct. But if you say America failed, we will disregard that 9 million women go to school or children go to school. There are hundreds of outlets, TV, radio, in terms of freedom of expression. There are thousands of roads built. We had a very good constitution, a political system that was one of the finest in South Asia. So there were gains as well, but unfortunately we lost them. We lost them in a matter of just split second like that. They just all went out of our hands.
Thank you. It's an excellent point to finish. It just proves that complexity that we were talking, the history, the society, and also connectivity of international, regional, national, subnational. I think this is really a good point just to end. Unfortunately, in these virtual, we can't give clapping to all our speakers, but please use the reactions to do clapping. And remember to turn off, they need to restart and reboot the system again. Thank you to all paper and questions and participants. Bye.